Hello everyone, I'm Russell Rowland. This is my friend Adrian.
Hello.
Adrian and I have been hosting a lecture series here in Billings where we live for a little over 3 years now, I think, it was originally called the Native American Race Relations and Healing Lecture Series. I think we've sort of shortened it now to the Native American Lecture Series. Adrian came to one of my talks about, it was at the Pictograph Caves here in Billings, and I was talking about how when I moved back to Montana a few years ago, I was kind of shocked at how little progress had been made in communications between natives and non-natives, and Adrian picked up on that, and we got together and decided to start a conversation. So today we're going to talk about, you want to kick something in there?
We did this one thing at Missoula. We started off with Kelly Two Teeth, aka Stephen Bear, and we talked about Two-Spirit Transilience, it was called, and then we were just going to continue that, but then of course this whole coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever, and it kind of stunted whatever we were going to keep doing that.
Yeah. So that's this particular talk. We're going to talk about the Two-Spirit issue, and Adrian obviously has some personal knowledge about this. It's been interesting knowing him as he goes through this transition period of his life. So I'm just going to ask him a bunch of questions and ask them. This is going to happen probably a couple more times, but I'm trying to do the pronoun thing. Okay.
Yeah, and I give Russell a break because like half the time he sees me, I'm like just showing up like I just got off a roof and looking like a dude, and then it's like yeah. And then next time you see me, I'm all dolled up like a half hour later. So. Anyways, yeah, I guess go ahead.
Yeah, so we're going to just start with, I want Adrian to give a brief explanation of what it means. What is a Two-Spirit person?
Yeah, Two-Spirit is like an all-encompassing term. It came in like an umbrella term of let's see, they created it like back in, it hasn't been around too long. Well, I guess since like 1990 they made it more official, but they had been kicking around since the 80s. Because the previous term was, I think I'm pronouncing this like Berdache, Berdache, and it was kind of a derogatory term that just always stuck. So if you want to look up anthropological instances of that's what you would Google, then all this stuff, Berdache, that's what I think it was the French traders had just kind of translated this word, and they just saw like these effeminate, trans people and tribes, and they're just like, oh, they must be similar to these Berdache people we sing over in wherever in Arabia and stuff, it was this kind of a really, when you translated it fully, it was like kind of a really degrading term. It was like slave boy or something, like it was like, and then it's like, no, we can't keep using that term, and we need something more, whatever. And then at the same time, it was like a whole LGBTQ thing, they really didn't fit in that. It wasn't like we weren't defined by sexuality per se. It was like more of a spiritual thing as well. I guess Two-Spirit is like a literal translation from the Ojibwa term, Nishmanaduwag. Of course, my Ojibwa is not very good, but it was just like inhabiting both men and women. That's two spirits, two people, which would be, in today's parlance, probably non-binary. But at the same time, it just kind of covered the whole perspective of LGBTQ people too. But there's like gay native people that won't claim Two-Spirit, and it's kind of up to them if they don't feel that way. Like my tribe, for instance, would be Himane, which kind of has a like man becomes a woman basically, and it's in your spirit, in your heart, in your soul, and they have a similar term for a womanly hearted man too, or manly hearted woman and stuff. So it's almost like they have 4 gender variations of it, and other tribes have the same thing. Winkte for the Lakota tribe, and
When did you realize you were Two-Spirit?
I mean, I came out and basically in an article in like 2018. Was it 2018?
Yeah, I think so.
It was like the beginning of that. And I the reason why it took me so long is because, well, we live in Billings, and I had to think back, well, what's all this stuff that's preventing me, that had long prevented me besides society? And I was like, and it was just like, I just, as a writer, journalist, had to process that. What created this atmosphere that made me intimidated by it? Because I almost did go to I had known since I was like a little kid and stuff, and I always felt guilty about it growing up in this Judeo-Christian society. It's like when I was a little kid, I remember praying like I felt like a sinner. I felt bad. I felt like an abomination and stuff. And it was just like 17 and stuff, and I was with a gal that was more accepting of it, and it was always in the closet thing. But then it was like, then you just start thinking of coming out. I remember seeing this one gal, and she was like really gorgeous, a trans gal, and then I was just like inspired by them, and then I just kept waiting for them to show up at some dive bar of all places. And at first I was like attracted to them because they were a beautiful native gal, and then I was just like, oh, and then I was just like fascinated when I didn't even know they were trans until they mentioned it to the bartender, and I was just like, that I just seen them come in one day, and they were just like heartbroken because the police had been harassing them, and then they were just like, the police, just because she kept saying, I just wanted to look pretty today. I just wanted to look pretty. And it was just like so sad watching her. It was like the police were calling me a hooker or whatever and stuff. And just because and then I was like, yeah, I can't be that strong as her. And stuff. I guess yeah, when I came out in that article, it was like this whole, I'll talk about that in a minute, but it was just like, I had pondered it because I became celebrated like 2.5 years of sobriety the other week. So, and that was another thing, is like, during that year, I just like going to take a break from relationships and stuff. And it's like, oh, I haven't been with anyone for years anyway. What's that matter? But during that sobriety, it was like, well, if I become sober, and you start thinking about those, the gender, sexuality and stuff, and it just kept popping up in my head. It's like, that's something I had to be honest with myself with, not only as a person in recovery, but as just being accepting of yourself, but also as like I would say I'm an artist. I'm truthful to myself, and I had to like kind of practice what I preached and stuff, and just be true to myself. And then
So why don't you give us a little bit of historical perspective on what happened with the Two-Spirit people?
Right before Columbus, actually, over in Spain and stuff, they had been really, it was like about 1478 or something. They had started making coming out really hard against Sodomy. It was like something there. It was like during the Inquisitions and stuff, and that's what they used to take lands. And it was like something the Moors. They said, well, the Moors had conquered them. They felt this inferiority, whatever. But we could always hold the high ground because they were more lenient toward sexuality. So sodomy became one of their big things, and it became like if you were are convicted of sodomy, often on flimsy charges, they take your lands and everything, just like they would with witches. Except if you're burned as a witch, they would strangle you, then burn you. But if sodomy, they would just burn you alive. So they come over to the Americas and stuff, and they see all these trans Two-Spirit people, and they even further they get into conquistadors, and they're seeing these big temples and stuff, and there's like these trans Two-Spirit people just walking around like almost like leaders and stuff, and very exalted and stuff, and they were just appalled by this. And at the same time, it was like became almost like a number one reason why they could treat them like less than human, less than savage. Because at the same time, you couldn't say, well, we can't just force them at knife point to accept Christianity, or just take their lands without compensation. But we can do it. Even the more liberal scholars at the time said if they were, practicing incest, cannibalism, and sodomy. And sodomy became their number one thing because as soon as they see trans people, that's exactly what they, or effeminate men, they would say, that became their number one reason. There's like a famous instance of one of the conquistadors, Balboa was his name. Anyways, yeah, there's like a famous drawing of it or something where he like threw this king and 40 sodomites into a pit and had them eaten by these big war dogs. These like big mastiffs. I don't know, they're scary looking dogs, and just ripped them apart limb to limb, and then all the way up to all the conquistadors going all the way up to California and stuff. It was like in the 1780s and stuff. There was an instance of a priest, like, you know, they said they were pretty prevalent there, and the Two-Spirit people, and one of the Spanish priests caught one of the people in a sexual act with a Two-Spirit person, and they were just, I mean, they know what's going on, but they made an example of them. It's like, it's not a good example as I wanted to. I wanted to punish them harshly. They just kind of made another concerted effort to clear the area of all these people. So even if they were, they pretty much stayed in a closet. And like by the 1820s, 40 years later, there's like, they were like reporting success. We got rid of all these Two-Spirit people, and you know, and that was just like the attitude of just clear out the areas. And that followed all the way up. And then of course, the Judeo-Christian values coming from the New England coast on over, those were pretty much the same thing too. Mm-hmm. It was like always appalling. It's like, I remember it was George Catlin. Yeah, he like, this one painting called The Dance of the Bradage. I think it was 1838 or 1840. And his note on it was like saying, well, this is like, he was just like expressing how appalled they were by it. As an artist, he was like drawn to this like ritual. They were honoring this Two-Spirit person, but at the same time they're appalled, saying, yeah, we need to make sure these are erased from the annals of history. Mm-hmm. And that almost, although that became definitive proof that these people existed, it also became the attitude too, that we're going to erase this from like tribal peoples and stuff, whoever we colonize and stuff, and they were often the first people targeted. And there was an elder Lakota guy who was saying, well, yeah, Crazy Horse had like one or two Winkte wives, Two-Spirit wives, and then people were like kind of baffled by that. I mean, if I tell people that, but at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, Crazy Horse is like really, you know, medicine, spiritual persons who are the Winkte people. And I remember like there's a story right before the Fetterman massacre, or I guess we call it the Battle of the 100 Slain, where they asked a Winkte person, or it might have been a Himane, either way, but it was a Two-Spirit person, and they had this vision where they just like came back like 3 times, and it's like, okay, I got 10 people, because they kept trying to draw them over at that ridge to kill them. And then finally they came back, they hopped off their horse and just kept slapping the ground, and then it was like, I have 100 lives right here you can get if you want to go attack right now or do your plan. And they're like, yeah, let's do this, let's go then. That's what Crazy Horse said. No, his exact words. But anyways, yeah. And then of course after that, it was this like Fetterman massacre happened, and when the Bozeman Trail, the Red Clouds War, and so the Crazy Horse held them in very high respect. So I guess I'll move up to 1890s. This is my long answer. By then, after the Indian Wars and stuff, all the, they're confined to reservations and stuff, and it was the Crow tribe. I remember it was Joe Medicine Crow. He said, those other tribes are just basically treated as POW tribes, the Cheyenne, Lakota, all the ones, but we were just mostly left alone for the most part. But then in the 1890s, they had this Indian agent, and he saw these Bada, I think that's what he said, B-A-D-E. Anyways, the Crow tribe had these Two-Spirit, and they kind of lived in a group and stuff. They were one of them was named Finds Them and Kills Them, and Finds Them and Kills Them was like the name like that, you're a badass warrior and stuff. I mean, they but highly respected anyway. I mean, they were kind of a tracker and stuff, plus put a Two-Spirit. They just lived as a woman. They said, we use pronouns, right, female pronouns for them and everything, and just like, don't fuck with them. And it was just kind of like, but the Indian agent, they were just like appalled by them, and then jails all this Bada, and then just like cuts their hair off And Joe Medicine Crow told this story to someone. He took them to the Crow Agency, the area where there's these oak trees. They're like, oh, why did you meet this story here? Points out those oak trees and said that's where they had them doing their man's labor, had them plant those trees. So there's some oak trees over there in Crow Agency that are planted by those two-spirit people. So
Interesting.
but he said, but when they were doing this, they were just like, the Crow tribe was just like appalled, like, oh my God, I mean, they were ready to have a revolt, and they had one of the Pretty Eagle chief came all the way across the res and said, you get this agent out of here, and which is kind of unheard of, just like a defiance to getting an agent out of there. It's usually they were the dictator, and that was it. But it just didn't click. It's like, no, this is the way they were born, and that's like when, just because they did a study the other week. It's called the Scientific Journal or something. But 30 people with gender dysphoria diagnosed, and it was like 19 of them. And well, that's, I guess, the native way of how they explained why someone was two-spirit is like, well, during their womb, what happens is the Great Spirit or the Creator, whatever, just kind of just changed their brain into a female brain. That was their explanation. It was like their soul, their brain, or whatever, their heart changed it into that. And that one scientific study that just came out this year, it kind of like it was kind of weird because it kind of confirmed that. It was like saying there's like these receptors of estrogen, testosterone, and all these people with gender dysphoria, they studied them. They were like all very similar to whatever the opposite sex. All the receptors were. Yeah, and it was like 19 of 30 of them had like all these gender variations that were just completely different. Than their brain waves were different. Their brain receptors were different. And then they did it on 88 just regular people without dysphoria, and none of them had any of those.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I always thought that was interesting. So
that's pretty
the Lakota medicine man, Lane Dare, he said, the Great Spirit made them winktes, and that would become woman as their translation, and we accepted them as such. We think if a woman has two little ones growing inside her, if she's going to have twins, sometimes instead of giving birth to two babies, they have formed up in a womb into just one man, half woman kind of beings. But he says, to us it is just nature. We accept them for who they want to be. And that's up to them, just like, well, they're going to live that way. But it was also like a whole responsibility thing too, to, if you want to be two-spirit person in your tribe, it was like a heavy burden because you're like almost like expected to be like
mystical or something.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, you were like guided towards, well, you should learn these medicine beliefs and stuff, because a lot of them were like, they'd go on war parties and stuff, and they'd always be the physician, and they were always like the counselors, always the person you talked to, and you're always expected to be a great conversation. You had all these positive stereotypes, but it was like a lot of pressure. You like always be one of the hardest workers and setting like the hard example and stuff of, wouldn't necessarily a pious person or whatever.
The early codependence.
Yeah, it was just like, everyone depended on them. It was like you're like a marriage counselor too. You're the go-between. Right. Definitely in my tribe, that was one of the things too. It was like to even get hooked up with someone, if you ever wanted to get laid, you had to talk. You were the go-between person. So obviously you were very popular. But of course, all that changes like after they kicks them out of the agency and stuff, and that becomes a defining turning point, because there's all the boarding schools are taking people over to Carlisle and everything in greater numbers, and all these little kids are growing up with us taught to ostracize these two-spirit people, and eventually they start becoming less, don't be like them. And like there's this one story of a Navajo two-spirit. Navajos, like in their tribe, they were like almost like, I remember someone described it in one book, is like they were almost like what's the word? Anyways, they were very reverent anyway, but in the Navajo tribe, almost like a deity. That was the word. They were just like, they were gonna wealthy members of their tribe and just walked around very regal, like me now. No, just kidding. But it was just like they're proud of their two-spirit child and sent him to Carlisle boarding school, they're whatever, a female, and that was just their thinking.
Yeah.
And then the child went to school as such and everything. And then one day they had a lice outbreak, and then they had to like scrub every single kid down by hand, and they found out the child was biologically male, and they just like freaked out on this child and made a big scene and everything. I remember the lady who was telling the story, that was her cousin, she was telling it, and she was just like visibly mad and upset, still traumatized from that experience, because she's like, that was my cousin,
Right.
that was her bestie friend, and after that, they never saw that kid again. They don't know what happened, and there's graves all over Carlisle, and that was just like a lesson to all you other kids, and it was just like, that's poor old elder lady was just like telling the story with tears in her eyes. It was just like a traumatic experience to have, but I always imagine, I had to write about it in fiction, but it was like, imagine they were just kind of protecting this one little two-spirit kid.
Right.
That was like part of there was almost like the resilient symbol of, we're not all bad, despite what we're told we're wrong, whatever.
Yeah.
Even the Crow tribe, one of their, I think her name is Nellie Pre-Eagle Stewart. And, and she became like a adherent to Christianity, Pentecostalism, and that's kind of this is the area where Pentecostalism on the Plains tribes took off. And at the time, Pentecostalism was an upstart religion, and the U.S. government didn't think too highly of it, because it was kind of like, oh, they're speaking in tongues. This isn't like a very whatever. But at the same time, they couldn't do it, and it was the only way they'd allow gatherings. That Indian agent was like very strict, but they couldn't stop them from gathering, so they kept growing and growing these meetings. So Crow tribe became one of the first to really adapt it. And then, this one Pentecostal came to their tribe and was like impressed by their dedication to it, and to whatever, this Pentecostal religion. They're just like, wow, they're just like really spiritual, and you can see how it would like appeal. It's like you tell the story of Jesus, and it's like a good story, and it's like, oh yeah, he fasted and prayed for 40 nights. That's really good. There's all these cross things, and Jesus being a good person, and so they're really combining these religions and stuff of Crow spirituality, and it didn't seem to like, I'm gonna sweat and pray to Jesus and whatever. But about the 1950s, they sent Life Bible College, which is a lot of people still go to that I think it's in Los Angeles. I know people have gone to it, so I don't, Bethel, yeah, maybe it's Bethel, but yeah, Bethel. Anyways, they sent like 4 Crow tribal members, and one of them came out there. His name was Harold Carpenter, and he's very, very charismatic speaker, very powerful speaker, and people just flock all the way around like the northern plains to come hear this person. But he really set the tone back in the 50s and 60s of there can be Jesus ways or the old traditional ways, no in between. You have to accept one or the other. So all this baby boomer generation kind of grew up in this old with those kind of teachings where all traditional teachings start becoming abandoned, and we combine that with the boarding schools, and then that, and by the about the 1980s, anything Winkte or Himane, it just kind of becomes a slur, really. It's like on cue with the faggot and stuff. That's how we call someone, and it became like really, yeah. You can see how it kind of erased it out of there. Two-spirit people erased. Anyway.
Okay. What's the importance of the natives being able to come back to the two-spirit acceptance?
Like that whole story with the Crow tribal member, that's something that I always tell, like, like I would talk to the city council with the whole non-discrimination ordinance thing. Yeah, and that's one of the stories I said, this is like something we have to, have to see. This is how because Montana's always brag, oh, I'm this generation Montana and 5th generation. Well, this has been a lot longer than you. We were accepting of trans people. This has been this area for forever, you know.
Yeah.
It's like always the Salish tribe. They lay claim to their area up in Missoula. It's like, we've been here 10,000 years, which is like the end of the Ice Age. It's like, oh yeah, that's
Didn't
probably
they have
true.
Separate bathrooms back then.
Separate trees. It's like when I came out, I kind of knew, had all this background in my head, and I just kind of like, well, I knew I was a journalist, as a semi-public speaker, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I knew I was going to get asked to speak and everything. I was like, am I ready for this? And it was like, fine, I guess I have to do it, because it was just like something in my heart where it was just like, it wouldn't allow me to like, I don't know, I wouldn't say live with myself, but it was just kind of like, had to stop suppressing it, and it had to become, you know,
be your authentic self.
Yeah, and you know, it was like something, I don't know.
Well, and it really seems to come down to, you know, whether people are able to accept that that's a truth. I mean, that's who you are. So, you know, the whole idea of like suppressing that is it's just not possible. I mean, the only other option is to pretend like it doesn't exist, which is, you know, burying your head in the sand. So all the people that are trying to say that you know, we shouldn't pander to people like this are just sort of denying reality, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, well, I didn't want to get into the whole whatever, the science of it, but it is just like, that's what it always comes back to. It's just your natural way of being. When did that become an abomination? Right. That's when I had to think to myself, why did I think I was an abomination?
Yeah.
And then how do we get from that to Fort Peck tribe from Crazy Horse upholding wingtails are like sacred, and like upholding them, to making bathroom bills in Fort Peck, because they did. And I was like, how did we get there? But there was here's this quote I have to say. This one of the most, Paula Gunn Allen, who became one of the first scholars to really organize this stuff about Two-Spirit people, before they were able to talk to a lot of elders and stuff before they, you know, passed back in the 70s and 80s and stuff. But she was a Laguna Pueblo, and so I'm really indebted to her studies. And she said, the quote, she said, if you make people hate, she said Bradash, but I'll just use Two-Spirits, they will lose their Indianness. It says the connection become, you know, trans people, it's like spiting on your own culture. You're not going to be able to decolonize. She described constant attacking of Judeo-Christian values opposed upon natives as, quote, psychological colonization. If you hate the traditions, you hate part of yourself as an Indian. If you hate yourself, that weakens your resolve to oppose white colonization. If we could stop Indian homophobia, other aspects of our cultural revival can occur. We must recolonize ourselves. The issue of self-determination for Indians means acceptance of LGBTQ people, and is central to accepting ourselves as Indian. And and I guess that's like probably the quote I should end on. But
that sums it up pretty well. So thank you for joining us. We're going to actually share some links at the end with some articles that you can read if you're interested in learning more about this. I'm Russell Rowland. This is Adrian Jawort, and this is the Native American Lecture Series. Thanks a lot for joining us, and thanks to Humanities Montana.
Thank you.